Not because the walls absorbed sound, but because sound never stayed here. It seemed afraid to remain. Even footsteps, if someone walked a little faster than usual, faded almost instantly, as if the house carefully erased their traces. The boy knew this intuitively. He felt space differently from others. Through the floor, through the air, through his own body. Sometimes, when his father walked along the corridor, the floor trembled slightly, and the boy lifted his head before he saw him. That was how he knew he was not alone. Lucas did not know what sound was, but he knew what waiting was. He sat on the living room carpet and laid out the pieces of a construction set in front of him. The airplane would not come together. The wing did not fit again, and he calmly, without anger, set the piece aside. His movements were slow and precise, as if he were afraid of doing something unnecessary. Not something loud, but something wrong. His right hand moved toward his ear again. He did not realize this gesture. It was as natural as blinking. Sometimes the pain was dull and distant, like pressure from far away. Sometimes it was sharp and pulsing. Then he simply sat and waited for it to pass. 8 years is a long time to get used to pain. Alexander Rain stood by the window of his study and looked at the river. The water was calm, almost motionless. He hated this river. It flowed as if it had no purpose, as if it did not care where it would end. Sometimes it seemed to him that if he could stop anything in this world, he would begin with it. His life had been a series of decisions. Fast, precise, final. He did not hesitate, he chose. People around him called this strength of character. He himself had long understood that it was fear. If he stopped, if he allowed himself to think, it would become unbearable. With his son, he could neither choose nor decide. Lucas was born without a cry, without the first breath that everyone hears, without the sound that usually says he is alive, and had died a few hours later. Alexander never spoke about it out loud. Even in his thoughts, he tried to avoid that day. But sometimes, late at night, when the house completely sank into stillness, he heard her breathing, not with his ears, but with memory. And then it became clear the silence in this house was not the result of illness. It was mourning that no one dared to end. Eleanor did not know this. When she came to work here, the house was simply Lojan to her. She did not admire it and she was not afraid of it. She thought about something else. About the medicines her grandmother had stopped taking to save money. About calls from the nursing home. About how quickly money disappears when it is truly needed. The work was simple. The rules were strict. Silence was mandatory. That suited her. On the first day she barely noticed the boy. On the second day she paid attention to the way he looked. Not into the eyes, but slightly lower. At lips, chins, hands. She recognized that gaze immediately. That is how those look who long ago understood that the world must be read, not heard. On the third day she saw him touch his ear. And on the fourth day as well. Pain does not always scream. Sometimes it simply exists. It sits nearby, breathes in rhythm, waits until it is remembered. Eleanor began to observe. Not intentionally. Not like a doctor. Like a person who had once seen something similar. Lucas grew tired faster than other children. By evening he became quieter and slower, as if every movement required effort. Sometimes he simply sat, hugging his knees, and stared at one point. She noticed that he avoided sudden gestures. That he flinched if someone came too close. That his drawings were always neat, but constrained, without a single extra line. One day he dropped a pencil. He watched it roll across the floor and did not move. As if this simple action was too much for him. Eleanor picked up the pencil and placed it beside him. He looked at her for a long time. Then he smiled carefully. That smile stayed with her for a long time. She saw it 2 weeks later. Light from the window fell at the right angle. Lucas was sitting with his head slightly tilted. And she noticed something deep inside his ear that should not have been there. Not dirt. Not a shadow. Something dense and foreign. Her heart tightened. She knew what it could mean. And she knew that if it was true, all those years had been a mistake. Someone else's negligence. Someone else's indifference. Someone else's profit. That evening she barely breathed. She understood that she was no one. She had no education, no authority, no right to touch him. But there was something else, responsibility. The kind that is not given with a diploma. At night Lucas woke up in pain. He did not scream. He never screamed the way other children did. He simply sat up in bed and pressed his palm to his ear. His breathing became fast and uneven. Something tightened in his chest, as if the entire world had suddenly become too small. Eleanor felt movement. Not sound, movement. Something in the house had changed, and she understood it. She entered the room and saw him. The decision did not come immediately. It was not sharp. It was heavy and slow, like stepping into water when you do not know the depth. She was trembling. She prayed. Not with words. With her whole body, with every cell. Please let me not be wrong. When everything was over, Lucas sat motionless. Then he inhaled. Sharply. Deeply. And froze. The world rushed into him at once. Not gradually and not gently. First came the ticking of the clock. Then his own breathing. Then the rustle of the sheet as he moved. He cried. Loudly. Unevenly. Truly. Eleanor sank to the floor. Alexander saw them in the morning. He saw blood. An instrument. A frightened woman. And his son, who was looking at him differently. Dad, Lucas said. The word was crooked and uncertain. But it was spoken. Alexander did not fall. He did not shout. He simply stopped breathing for a few seconds. At that moment, everything he believed in collapsed. Then there were doctors. Different ones. Real ones. Documents. Records. Old conclusions. It turned out that everything could have been fixed many years ago. The price was known. Alexander paid it in full. The house did not change immediately. First came the sound of water in the pipes. Then footsteps. Then music. Quiet and careful, like a guest everyone is afraid to scare away. Lucas listened. Sometimes he covered his ears, the world was too loud. But he smiled. He lived. Eleanor left a month later. Alexander did not try to stop her. He knew that some people come to save, not to stay. Sometimes in the evenings Lucas sat by the window and looked at the river. Now he could hear it. And he knew that silence is not a sentence. It is just a pause.